and welcome to the Art of Leading, Captivating Leadership Narratives, all part of the stuff that growth is made of. I'm excited to introduce you to Melanie Hartzog. Mel is the president and CEO of the New York Foundling and a member of my Vista CEO Peer Advisory Group. Hello, Mel. Welcome. And I'm so glad to be sharing you with our listeners today.
Thank you for having me.
What I'd love to do is let's start our discussion, just having you share an overview of the New York Foundling,
Sure.
a little bit of the background and history, what are the services? That'd be a great way to start, and then we'll move more toward you.
Sure. I'm really proud of the Foundling. So this organization has been here for over 150 years, started by the Sisters of Charity, with a mission that we still carry today, which is meeting the needs of community and meeting them where they're at. It started with actually the Foundling, which was a child that was left at the doorstep of the Sisters of Charity, who then said, we must take this child in, we must take any child in who's abandoned and provide the supports that they need and connect them when we can with a caring family. And to their credit, amongst many others, they actually started the child welfare system, and for that matter, the social safety net system in New York, thanks to their work. The Foundling has started in child welfare. It's now evolved. We provide a range of services to children and families in the 5 boroughs, Rockland, Westchester counties, as well as the island of Puerto Rico, where we provide over 40 early childhood centers. Here, closer to home, as I said, is child welfare services, but we also serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, about 850 people per year who live in our residential settings throughout the New York City area, as well as alternatives to incarceration for young people, youth that are justice involved, and many, many other services, as well as a charter school up in the South Bronx.
You're laughing. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. So we just have continued to evolve and meeting the needs of community, and also bringing to the services a sense of vigor and also rigor and evidence-based practice. And so we are one of the pioneers here in New York City for child welfare services to use evidence-based models, which now the city of New York has used across New York City programs. And we continue to celebrate, promote, and advocate for evidence-based practice.
I love that. So interesting. And again, I've heard you talk about New York Foundling. I had no idea that that's how it started. What a great story, in terms of a child showing up and, hey, we need to do what's right here, and has continued to not only do that, but expand.
And the sisters to this day are still involved. They actually sit on our board. And to me, it really brings home that sense of mission and history. And I think is very, for our staff, we have about 2,200 employees across the organization. And that sense of mission that the sisters bring, you really feel it. And this is not easy work. It's challenging work, as we all know.
Right.
And to have that connection to the history of this organization, to the sisters, really makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, and again, purpose driven is amazing to be part of that. It's a wide range of services. If someone needed help, how do they find you, or how do they qualify? And I know there's so many aspects of it.
Yeah, the easiest way is to visit our website. It's nyfoundling, all one word, .org. And you can get a sense of the breadth of services we provide. One of the things that in my time here, I've just completed year 3, is really, to your point, Margaret, we are such a large organization with more than 30 programs. As I said, 2,200 employees, and we serve 30,000 people annually. which is my goal is to create what we call one front door. And so as, you know, for example, Mel is coming in to access one service, can we immediately on site provide her with all the services that the Foundling provides that she is eligible for, with one touch, and not then referring her to 6 other Foundling staff where it's easy to get lost in the mix. And we are very close to achieving that goal. It's been 3 years in the making, so I'm very
I
excited
love
about
that.
that. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, because I would imagine someone coming in doesn't know what's available to them. They may be coming in with one specific thing. So,
that's
well, I
absolutely
know,
right. Yep.
yeah, and I know from just the conversations we've had over the last year or two, you've made some significant changes there. So, you are very humble and don't like talking about yourself, but you have such an incredible experiences. That has led you to your current leadership role. So I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about your journey as a leader and some of the experiences that you've had over the last 5 to 10 years.
Cool. Um,
See, I heard that.
oh, well, I got an interesting start, which was I went down to college in Florida, because I was really set on being a marine biologist. I went on a trip to Fire Island. I grew up on Long Island my high school year, and that set it for me. It was marine biology all the way. And as part of the college I went to, we had to do community service. It was one of the best things that ever, I think for me, um, really helped me figure out my true calling, which was my community service was volunteering with children who, while their moms were in therapy sessions at a domestic violence shelter, I got to work with their children and administer play therapy. And that to me was a real game changer to see the kind of impact that I could make on a one-on-one basis with a child. And I said, that's it. I'm changing my major to social work. There was a little bit of like a shift to education in there for a couple hot minute, but it became social work. And that really started me on the trajectory of wanting to be a social worker, largely in child welfare. I worked all summer in Florida, and the one job that I had over the summer where I was a summer camp counselor, for young people, and I had a mom who was 16 who wanted to work but didn't have childcare. So who do you think decided to provide childcare for her kid? That would be me. And I had a great mentor who said, you know what? Social work is in your heart, but I think you should think about policy and a bigger level and what more you could do. And I thought she was joking. I was like, what does that mean? And I wound up coming back home, for a whole set of personal reasons as well, back to New York, and I went to the New School for graduate school in public policy. And that just changed my trajectory. From there, I went to work for the Bronx Borough President. I got a real sense of the intersection of policymaking with financing and politics and community and priorities. It was a great place, a great grounds to learn how all of those things intersect and what wins over at whatever particular given moment. Of course, I don't think I was savvy enough at 20 something, 23 to realize that now, but I think that was a great grounding place in that. Took me to work in the nonprofit sector as well, and then back into government. And I think the government experience for me, serving under 2 different mayors, and really understanding impact, how many New Yorkers' lives do you touch in very different ways under very different circumstances, one of which was, very recently, post 9/11, where I served in government. And the second time was in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, and, again, interspersed in between that were, work in the nonprofit sector. And I think for me now with the Foundling, I always get this question of, wow, you were in government during the pandemic and, how many millions of lives you impacted. And I said, absolutely. And they're like, well, now you're at the Foundling, it's 30,000 people annually. Like, how does that compare? And I'm like, well, it's just different. And the difference for me is, in government, when you're working at that level, you're moving from one issue to another, from one community to another, and you're moving at such a fast pace. And here at the Foundling, the lives that we touch and the communities and people that we impact, I get to see them all the time. And I get to form those deep connections with them. And it's just a very different nature of the job. And it's really fulfilling in a very different way. So
I
that's
love that.
the long and short of it.
It's such you know, an impressive background and experience, and living this purpose-driven life, and knowing that regardless of unprecedented times, whether it was after 9/11 or COVID or changes going on in the population and the services throughout New York City that also impacts what you guys offer, um, it's finding a way to make a difference and go forward. I'm always just in awe when I talk to you about things that you're doing, that is really meaningful and moving the needle for so many people. So thank you for sharing that. If you, first of all, I love that it was a mentor, who kind of said, hey, you should think about policy. And, you're right. When you have someone like that or someone suggests, and when you're young, you're like, oh, what does that mean? But it did put you on a different trajectory, or at least opened your eyes to something
Oh,
to
a thousand
explore.
percent. And I would just say, I feel extremely privileged to have mentors throughout my career, um, who weren't just about me professionally, but me personally and professionally. And, even to this day, the mentors that I continue to have, and people who may not necessarily see them as a mentor to me, but are trusted, advisors and my little kitchen cabinet of folks. I think it's so
Hmm.
important, especially in these roles, in leadership roles where you can feel really lonely, and that you have
Yeah.
that network of people that you can go to, that know you and your, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that you get to help you reflect and grow and build. To me, that I could name countless people, that I'm here where I am because of their support and
Yeah.
leadership. So, I try to pay that forward, especially with young people and our employees, how can I lend that to you? Because it was so valuable to me.
Yeah. I remember years ago hearing the term your own personal board of directors, and it, I didn't get it. It took me a while to get it, and it is so true. And especially if it's people who know you and just want the best. There's no hidden agenda. There's
Yeah.
nothing, and having different perspectives. It sounds like you've had a lot of people, helping you, and sometimes they don't even realize. Sometimes their advice totally changes your trajectory of how you move forward or your
Oh,
focus.
100%.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So when you look back in time now, what advice would you give your younger self?
Let me try to boil it down there. I think, uh, grace, um, that giving myself the grace to, uh, be young and learn and make mistakes and, um, grow with them. I think I took things so deeply. I remember one of my mentors, fortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, but I don't know, young. I was storming into his office. I just wrote this important report that we both believe that we should have out there, and now you're telling me we can, and it's just so important, and we should. And he turned to me and he was like, "Mel, stop. It's not about you. It's not about you." And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not talking about me. And he's like, yes, you are. It's not about you. It's about the work. It's about strategy and the right time to do things. and we've got to step back and reflect. And I think that that to me was also a valuable lesson. You know, when you're so invested in the work, and you know, you're not coming from it from an ego perspective, but it's like, you know, I did all this work and it has to be done and it has to be out there. And it's like, oh, no, no, no. There's time and place, there's a strategy, there's tactics, there's all these different aspects. And I was thankful that I learned that lesson very early on in my career, because I carried it with me throughout. But that, and you know, again, the grace to make mistakes, because I really, and you know, it's still probably a little bit of my Achilles heel, which is being a little too hard on myself. And doing that can really stifle your ability to not only grow from that, but to move on, right?
Yeah.
And now I've learned to give myself like time. Like I'm not, yeah, I'm still gonna dwell, but like there's a time limit on that, and then I just gotta like put it down and move on and get over it. And what are you gonna take from it? And not continue to stew. Which, you know, look,
It's
I'm not perfect. It happens sometimes, but I most certainly thankful I learned that lesson so early on.
Yeah. And a lot of times when you're in the heat of the moment, again, whether it's because you put so much energy into something and you're vested or whatever, it's sometimes hard to keep that in perspective at that time.
Yeah,
But
and I can reflect back
yeah,
now as if, you know, I knew that then. I didn't know that then, right?
yeah,
And that's the thing I would tell myself in those moments, which was, right, all of these things, grace, learning from it, moving on, not dwelling. And you learn by making those mistakes.
yeah. I love that. That word has come up. Actually, there's another one of our colleagues in our group. His words this year, we always focus on what's the word of the year that you that's gonna describe how you want to focus. And his would say growth and grace. I need to give myself some grace, um, and not be so hard. So I think that's such a great word. Well, thank you for sharing that. So, what were some of the challenges that you faced early in your leadership roles?
Um, my age, you know, which you really can't overcome. You know, I was in my early 30s and was asked to run for the city, the early childhood system. And, you know, at that time, it was the largest early childhood system in the country, run by a city. And I remember being in an event, one of my mentors, still to this day, was taking me around to meet people, and I heard someone say, "What does she know? She's so young, she barely knows anything." Um,
Mm,
and that really got my back up, and I had for a bit a real chip on my shoulder, like, you know, I've got to prove, I've got to prove. And that was hard, and you can't overcome age, right? And so, you know, yeah, I don't have a good answer for it. That was one thing that was just
so yeah, so
a
how did you move
challenge.
on from that? I mean, you said for a while you had a chip on your shoulder and then you didn't. What were some of the tactics or strategies that you pivoted to whether it stopped feeling like, oh, I have to prove myself, or how did you make your experience come alive so that became a non-issue?
Um, yeah, no, I for sure let it go. There's nothing I can do. I am what I am.
Right.
I was the age I was, and I was like, you know, you put your head down and you do the work and you build leadership and trust in your staff. And those were really hard times. It was the Great Recession. I went from a division of 300 to 150. We had layoffs then. And I think the real measure for me at the end of that experience was, you know, my staff believed in me and my direction and supported me. And that was a lot. And took a lot of hard work to make happen, but it was because I had to let it go. And
Yeah.
I also had a great chief of staff at the time who said, you know, that iron fist you have is really useful at times, but maybe you want to put on the velvet glove a little bit more. And so, you know, I'm thankful for the wisdom she gave me very early on in my career. Again, people in your career who are true advisors and want the best for you. And then the other thing I think was striving for perfection. You know, and I say it now, I just said it today to someone, like, perfect can't be the enemy of good. And, sometimes you just have to go with the
I
good.
love that. Yeah.
And so, for a long time, it was, no, 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 it's perfection, it's perfection. And I remember one of my staff in that same position I was talking about coming to me saying, you know what, I can't do my day-to-day job and all these other things that you're asking. I just can't. I'm burnt out, I'm worn out. And that to me was that moment of like, oh my gosh, you're not only affecting yourself with this perfection, you're everybody else around you. Like, this is not, from my perspective, that wasn't good leadership. And it was a real wake-up call for me to, like, again, that, perfect can't be the enemy of good. And you've got to pick and choose, you know, what you're really going to put your energy into. It can't be everything, and be strategic and know your tactics. So, it wasn't in that moment suddenly I got it, and but it was that moment where I realized that, you know, this drive for perfection is not healthy and not good for you as a leader. You've got to be balanced. You've got to meet your staff too where they're at. Because that's the other thing. You can't, at least from my perspective, can't inspire people and lead people if you don't understand where they're coming from.
I love that. Boy, lots of good nuggets. You know, perfect can't be the enemy of good. Pick and choose where to put your energy. And I love the last beat that you can't inspire unless you know where they're coming from. It is interesting as when you're younger, there is I remember my own kind of anger and frustration, which I got wiser to say, okay, I need to sit back. It's not that important. How do I put it in perspective? All of those things. And also perfection. No, sometimes for you, you may not be dotting every I, but most people are never going to know that. They're going to think what you're doing is really good. So sometimes it's putting that in perspective too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good. So just switching a little bit today, what is your leadership philosophy?
I learned so much in my second time in government about, and I don't think I articulated this style of leadership until this position, but you know, this idea of we are a team of leaders. The organization, the issue, whatever you're working on doesn't move without having a group of people who are working together towards a collective impact and goal. And that was in, Technicolor for me during the pandemic. You don't roll out an entire vaccination effort across New York City to vaccinate millions and millions of New Yorkers as one single city agency, or even three or four. It is an entire collective effort across, all of city government to make that a reality. You don't open up New York City's economy with, just the folks who do economic development. It is a whole collective effort and a shared sense of purpose, goals, and fate. And so, um, you know, that is a philosophy that I learned that I couldn't articulate in this way now at that time, but most certainly have carried it forward to this organization, which is we have a mission, each of us has a role, and then there's our collective role together. And how do we move this organization forward? And it's not just about me as a leader, it's about all of us in these leadership roles, and not just at the top, it's all the way down. Which is, one of the biggest challenges I have, which is that is a true culture change for this organization.
Yeah. One of the things which I think has been a real theme for us from our short conversation here is you are extremely thoughtful, Mel, and I love, when you're in the heat of the moment, sometimes it's hard to see the forest through the trees, but it it sounds like you take the time to reflect and learn from, again, could be weeks later, months later, whatever, but you do spend the time to think about the situation and what are the lessons to apply forward, which not a lot of people do. Sometimes the heat of the moment, they just go on to the next thing. So you've articulated that multiple times, I think, through our conversation. And I think that's what makes you, such a thoughtful leader that's
Thank you.
making a big difference. Well, good. Well, thank you for that. So, a few more questions. As a leader, what would you say your biggest challenge and opportunity is right now?
I think it's both it's what I talked about, which is the culture change. I think it's a tremendous opportunity because of the history of this organization and what we are capable of doing. I think as a nonprofit, we're in a very fortunate situation. The Foundling as an organization, we're a healthy nonprofit. I talk with many of my colleagues who, worry about cash flow and issues of getting reimbursed from city government or state government or whatever entity that they contract with. And that is not something that, I worry about day to day. That's a really fortunate place to be. And I don't forget that. And so, when you have that room and opportunity to think about, you've got such a strong foundation as an organization, what's the culture change you want to bring about? And, I think it's the challenge because it's an organization that has really been, the top down from one division to the next and not the collective impact. So for example, using this idea of one front door, which is, you know, I can work in one department. I don't have to know every single one of the 30 plus programs, but I have to be thinking about that in top of mind when, I engage a member of the community, that we're one organization. And we've come a long way. I think about if I measured like the little S as success as a leader,
Mhm.
my first couple of weeks on the job, and I went to one of our sites and met with some new staff, and I'm saying, we serve hundreds of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's actually more than half of the services that we provide as an organization. And some of the staff were like, what? We serve people with developmental disabilities? And for me, that was shocking, right? And so this idea of really one front door, we're one organization, how do we move together collectively? How do we uplift the work that you're doing in this one program, but also understand we're uplifting the entire organization's mission? I feel that, is finally starting to get ingrained in our DNA, and people are really starting to embrace that. And that's a culture change,
Yeah,
I can
a
see that
huge culture change.
and feel that difference.
Yeah,
And then
because
I
you're
think,
asking people who are typically in their silos and
yeah,
hopefully doing well in their silos to think about the entity and what's the power of the entity to your client or customer or the person in front of you, the community.
yeah, and again, like we're fortunate to have the space to really think about these things. And I think another great example is, we're one of the few organizations that really embraces and meets individuals with developmental disabilities where they're at and really understands that this is part of who they are. It doesn't define who they are, right? And, that is not an obstacle. It is how do you live and how do we help you thrive? And one of the things that's become clear is that for those individuals with developmental disabilities who are justice involved, there are very few programs, services that know how to deal with that crossover population. What are the challenges and how do you meet them where they're at and bring evidence-based practice to that, right? And so we've challenged ourselves with, can we meet that need and that intersection of, an individual who has developmental disabilities, who is justice involved, who's, so many systems have failed because of, just like nonprofits can be siloed, so can government, but also bring what the Foundling has, which is not only, supporting that community, this particular community, but also evidence-based practice. And like that to me is, bringing the organization together. And we have our staff who work with justice involved youth working with our staff who provides, supports to our IDD community. And that's, you think about those little successes, that's a big one.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's I love the Run Front Door, and that is a big culture change, but an important one. So, well, thank you for sharing that. So, changing topics a little bit, it's always interesting to hear how leaders stay sharp. What are you reading or listening to? And I know you don't have lots of quiet time, but um, what are you reading or listening to right now that you would say is one of your favorite things?
Well, I haven't, just in terms of like leadership books, I feel like, Margaret, you've given us so many books, and if you ever quiz me, I'd fail. But the one thing that I stick to that very early on you introduced was Eric Coryell and Accountable
Mhm.
Teams. And for me, Eric was a real, aha moment for me, because he really brought together everything that I knew um, worked and was successful, and gave it a name and a structure and a framework and how to really move it forward. And our team has been working with Eric. He is well loved throughout the organization, which is great.
That's so nice.
And people are refreshed and really energized by the thinking of, we're in this together, and how do we hold each other accountable in a way that's not negative, that's positive. Even when the outcome that we're all working towards is preventing a negative, right? Um, and so that's something that we've really embraced as a leadership model. And then I'll be honest, I've been reading fiction to take my brain off of, if it's
Good,
something
you
where
got to do that. I
it's,
love that. A good trashy book that I could just
I wish I was
not put
reading a good
down.
trashy book. I, of course, picked up The Covenant of Water, which is really, if I was trying to get a brain break, this is definitely a book that is certainly fiction, but not a brain break. But
Yeah,
it definitely takes me
I
away.
like the trash.
But it's taking me away from constantly thinking about work and three kids who are all teenagers.
Yeah,
I ask the
got your
sisters to
hands
pray for me
full.
every day, every day.
That's
Um,
so funny.
but yes, that's my
Well,
current
the
one.
Eric Coryell, first of all, I'm sure he'll really appreciate that shout out. I remember when he came to talk to our group, we all have, this goes back to the siloed versus the collective. We all have our major, we all what we have to do in terms of our little group or whatever, but
Yeah,
it's a team, and the team has to be, there's a collective accountability with that. And I think that not necessarily was an aha, but helped highlight how important it is and that you need to really focus on it. So
yeah,
I'm glad that he's been able to help you guys. And I think that was one of the first ones. That was an early
yes,
on, I think.
very
Yeah,
early on. Which to
yeah,
me, when I think about my tenure here, it was so, how fortunate am I that that happened at that time, where I had the time to really build and ingrain that into part of the culture change for the organization. Um,
yeah,
and have a name for it, which I didn't have in my toolbox before. So
yeah.
yeah,
And sometimes it is just finding, it's the right time. It's what resonates, and there's a lot of great things out there, but what feels right that you could really get your hands around, and pick one and be successful at that, right?
right.
Versus multiple things. So, well, you have been extremely generous with your time, Mel. And in closing, what would you say are some of the critical success factors or secret sauce of being an effective leader?
Listening. And I say that with great exasperation, because sometimes as a leader, you're exhausted, and to your point, Margaret, like we were just talking earlier, you're running from one thing to another, or you get caught in like the death spiral of your inbox. And you get into a meeting with your staff and you're not listening. And you're like ready to give the response, you're ready to, just okay. And again, like I'm not perfect. But I try to really be intentional about listening. Because you learn so much from listening in so many different ways. You learn where people are thinking, what they're not thinking, what they should be thinking, from your perspective, why they're not. So many things that help you kind of, as a leader, calibrate like, okay, this is where I'm meeting this person where they're at, and I need them to get here. And if I'm listening to you, I can get you there so much easier than if I'm just using my iron fist as I did earlier in my career. And the patience to do it, because for sure I did not have that patience when I started out in my career. I do credit my son, because having a child just really, you have to have patience. It just changed my world of patience, and also priorities too. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's that listening part that I
I love
really,
that.
as a skill, had to learn.
But I think, also, you named so many great things that listening, and I find this with my kids talking about that, but just in general, I think it was a lesson learned from my kids that I have to be listening with an open mind,
Mhm.
because even I want to get them somewhere, I need to know where they're at. But sometimes there's many times there's things I didn't think about, and
Yep.
it's like, oh, maybe I need to pivot here or change or incorporate and stuff like that. So I think that's a great one and a secret sauce, and hard to do, much harder to do than it sounds if you do it
Oh, and
well.
I for
Yeah.
sure are much better at it at the job than I am with my teenagers. So, much better,
Yeah.
from our various informal therapy sessions.
Hey, listen, having kids your age, I mean, as I said, I remember you and I just were talking about this. It's like, glad I'm past that age for, different things. It's tough. It's tough. But, well, Mel, as always, I love speaking with you. Thank you for sharing your thoughtful insights around the art of leading. And thank you all for listening. This is the stuff that growth is made of.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.